Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Dean, Ross, great to see you. I see many old friends here and colleagues in city government, and Commissioner Rose Gilhern is here. Great to see you. Thank you for the great work that you're doing and the partnership that you have with our office. And Shari Hyman is here from the city, and the work we do with the city in all areas, I think, is increasingly coordinated, and I really appreciate your partnership as well. It is great to be in this beautiful building in this neighborhood, and I am told coming over here that, and I even remember as I was speaking to some of the older assistants who were in the office, that when I was a line assistant, there was a bit of an urban legend that made the rounds in the Manhattan DA's office, and it was about a student from New York Law School who applied to the DA's office, and there was an interview process, and one of the questions was, well, why do you want to work here? And the answer was, it's the best commute. And she got the job. And I know Elizabeth Pell, one of your students who I was speaking with earlier, is currently working with our cold case unit in the DA's office. And one of the things that she said was, it's unbelievable to be able to be a student here, go 4 blocks down to the Manhattan DA's office and work on some of the most interesting, rapidly evolving areas of science and law. And it really is true that the proximity of your campus and our office is to both our great benefits. And it's also true that the alumni of your school are well represented in our DA's office, and I'm very glad for that. And your alumni are working on the more than 100,000 cases that our prosecutors field every year in the Manhattan DA's offices. And they're applying the lawyering skills, the ethical sensitivities, and the training that they learned here so well to the cases that we believe are so important. And to begin with, that history, that relationship is why I am so pleased to let you know this morning the latest chapter in the collaboration between the Manhattan DA's office and this law school. And it is the development of a new clinic that will give New York law students hands-on experience in our office and will give the criminal justice system the benefit of their time, effort, energy. The clinic is going to be a central part of a new quality of life court part, a new initiative we established in the DA's office in 2011 in partnership with the Office of Court Administration. Now, the quality of life cases that the court part handles are misdemeanors and violations. Cases like shoplifting, for example, that collectively have a huge impact on the lives of New Yorkers every day. And these cases may sound like minor offenses, but anybody who's involved in criminal law knows that is not the reality. There is no minor case, period. There's no minor case for a victim. There is no minor case for a witness who has to come down to court and testify. There's no minor case for a police officer. And there is no minor case for someone accused of crime and members of their family. So every case matters to everybody. It matters personally to me. And enforcing these kinds of quality of life offenses are also crucial, we believe, to the continued health of our communities around Manhattan. But the reality is when thousands and thousands of these cases arrive in our courthouse and come into the criminal justice system, they have the capacity to overwhelm the courts to deal with them and to handle them responsibly. And they pull resources, additionally, from the more serious misdemeanor cases that we need to handle, like driving while intoxicated and domestic violence, something I'll talk about later. And that's why we implemented a new strategy last year designed to try to move these sorts of cases into a specialized court part to help us reduce the backlog of cases in the regular court parts to better serve everybody involved in the justice system. And those cases going into the quality of life part are handled by a single judge who is able to monitor the case from A to Z, and where direction is given to a young defendant to accomplish certain objectives in order to have the case dismissed, you have one judge who's making sure that it's accomplished. So we get better results, we believe, for all involved in the system by having the specialized court part, and it has been a remarkably successful thus far to us, and I'll tell you why, because we track some of these results. In the first year of its operation, there were more than 4,000 cases that moved to this quality of life part. And that helped us significantly to deal with some of the backlog we had in our overburdened criminal court. And with that decreased backlog and increased attention to our more serious misdemeanors, we were able to realize some real changes between 2009, just before I took over, and the end of last year. Our speedy trial dismissals were down 45% in misdemeanor court. DW speedy trial dismissals, driving while intoxicated, went down 90%, 87%, almost 90%. The number of criminal court trials we were able to commence in that time period went up 81%. The number of jury trials went up 33%, and the number of bench trials went up 134%. Now, I don't want to bore you with statistics, but I do want to tell you that those statistics reveal that the strategies that we are employing, including this quality of life part, to help deal with the real crisis in criminal court, managing this huge number of cases responsibly, that these strategies, I think, are having a great effect. And New York Law School and its students are going to help this program succeed even further, and I think have a huge impact on the welfare of our court system. So I come this morning to say thank you, and I look forward to working with your students every day over the next few years. Now, there's many people in this room, as I look around, who've chosen to work in the area of public service. And I assume that group is going to forgive me, or it may even thank me, if I make a boastful statement. That's also, I think, an unassailable statement. New York City is unique. It's different, simply, from even other great cities. And it's unique because what happens here affects the world in fundamental ways. It affects it in arts, in academia, in our design studios, and in government. What goes on in New York City is emulated, admired, or at least it's certainly debated and discussed all over the globe. And the impact is multiplied many, many times when we consider the reach of New York's financial institutions and markets. Financial transactions of all sizes from all over the world are in fact cleared through New York financial institutions, many on Wall Street, just a mile from this building. And our office has long taken the position that sound public policy not only justifies, but it in fact demands that the District Attorney of Manhattan prosecute serious financial crimes that cross our borders, whether physically or in this modern age when the internet is our 21st century crime scene in cyberspace. And there have been many applications of this principle over the years, certainly many that were made known by my predecessor. But I'd like to offer just one recent example to give you a sense of how important this job we have is and how much I believe is at stake. The United States and its allies have imposed a series of sanctions to force Iran to halt its nuclear weapons program. Now, I believe the importance of this to our international community, to our country, to our state, and to our city can't be overstated. And one important sanctions initiative was directed against the Islamic Republic of Iran shipping lines, which is known as IRISL, one of the largest shipping companies in the world. And partly, these measures against Iran's major shipping company were imposed as part of a general economic sanctions against Iran's economy to encourage a negotiated end to its nuclear program. But the sanctions against IRISL had a more direct impact as well. The ships of the Iranian fleet were being used to transport materials believed to be used to develop nuclear weapons. They were also being used to transport conventional weapons, including a cache of hundreds of tons of rockets, missiles, and mortars that analysts believed were headed to Hezbollah. Stopping the Iranian fleet would be an important step to slow the spread of conventional and nuclear weapons. Now, the international shipping industry, like most industries around this globe, conducts business primarily in US dollars. And that means that eventually its transactions must clear through American banks in New York. And so once the sanctions were imposed, our banks initiated sophisticated computer systems to detect and block payments from these sanctioned entities. Those efforts we hoped would deliver a devastating blow to the Iranian fleet, as well as many, many other businesses operating in these sanctioned countries. But almost immediately, my office became aware that IRISL had developed a scheme to evade these sanctions. IRISL enlisted corrupt individuals and corporations to launder payments through aliases and alter ego enterprises that would evade detection by New York banks. And in this way, tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars in payments were disguised by falsifying electronic and other records, and many through New York's banking system. We conducted a long investigation, and last year, after that investigation, our office indicted 11 corporations and 5 individuals for their roles in this conspiracy. Now, our partners in the federal government have also played a role and have now placed many of the newly indicted corporate enterprises on its sanctions list so that payments can't again be laundered by them. And this IRISL case is only one case in a front of our efforts to use New York's jurisdiction to combat global terrorism. Now, I know in the past months and in the past years, I hope many of you have heard of some of the cases colloquially referred to as stripping cases. And in these cases, banks stripped codes from electronic banking records, which otherwise would have tripped filters used by our banking system to hide the fact that payments cleared in New York were coming from and related to sanctioned countries. Lloyds Bank, Credit Suisse, and Barclays entered into deferred prosecution agreements with our office and with the Department of Justice, and this summer we resolved a similar case against ING Bank for $619 million. And that amount for that settlement alone should give you a sense of the enormity of the problem and the schemes. In total, over the last 4 years, our office alone, the Manhattan DA's office, is on track to deliver $900 million or $1 billion all total to the city and state of New York as a result of fines imposed upon these banks in this sanction effort. Now, I have an $80 million a year budget, and I think, if my math corrects me, that's certainly more than 10 times my annual budget. I think it speaks to, number one, we are in a city and a state that surely needs the money. And we are pleased to be able to return these monies to the city and state of New York to help balance budgets, fund programming, and to return illegal proceeds back to the state. But the impact of these cases, ladies and gentlemen, goes far beyond the monetary settlements, which happen to grab the headlines. The cases ensure that rogue regimes and human rights abusers feel continually isolated and international economic pressure from sanctions. They prevent money that would fund terrorists and terrorism and interdicts that support structure. They prevent some of the world's most dangerous regimes from buying the material to manufacture weapons, and they support the concept that we have to have accountability and transparency in our international banking system and in our banking system in New York, because if we have sanctions, they have to mean something, and so we have to enforce them. We've learned through tragedy that New York's preeminence, all of the things that makes our city a source of leadership and inspiration around the world, also makes it a prime target for terrorists. But that same preeminence, I think, gives us the obligation, and we have the tools, to take a leadership role in this fight against terrorism, to interrupt terrorist financing and funding, and the international corruption that flows from it. I'd like to shift for a minute my focus closer to home. As it is the first job of the district attorney, I have always understood to do everything I can to ensure safety on our streets and responsibly handle all of the cases that come through our office and before us. This is no small task. I alluded to the 100,000 cases that our office handles this year. And Rose Gilhern, who is a former federal prosecutor, will, I think, acknowledge, at least as a point of reference, that 100,000 cases is more criminal prosecutions than the entire United States Department of Justice files each year nationwide. and it all happens here in one courthouse in Manhattan. Now, New York has become a much safer place in the last 20 years, and we have many, many people to thank, the police department, prosecutors, the communities. But as we read every day, and what disturbs me greatly is that crime persists, serious crime persists in too many ways, in too many places in our communities. In our office, as we took a closer look at what was occurring in our county, looking at where crime was occurring and who was driving it block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, building by building, one thing became crystal clear to me. Gang violence has turned certain neighborhoods in our communities into war zones. The members of these youth crews are becoming ever younger and, unfortunately, better armed. Many times we see violence for the sake of violence, as well as petty turf disputes that become fatal. In other cases, the allegiance of the members is bound by profit, whether it's drugs or selling weapons. Just last week in our courthouse, the most significant members of a 35-member crew that were selling PCP in the Milbank Frawley houses in East Harlem pled guilty under the state's new drug kingpin law to running a multi-million-dollar drug ring that had turned the Milbank Frawley houses into a crowded drug market. The residents at the development, seniors, children, parents, were unable to move around the development because there was notorious drug dealing going on in the corridors, in the common areas, customers lined up outside on the street coming in. It was absolutely an intolerable, unacceptable situation. The peak hours for the drug trade were when the kids were going to school and coming home from school. And that clearly is absolutely no way for a community to live and is intolerable. Our investigation in that case, talking about community partnership, was in fact started by a letter from the community complaints. In a letter signed to law enforcement that was anonymously signed by the concerned tenants of King Towers, which was an adjacent development, residents told us that they feared for their safety and implored us to bring an end to the drug dealing so that the families could go on with their daily lives without fear. And so we did. In partnership with the NYPD, we developed a long-term investigation which didn't focus on going out and arresting low-level drug dealers, but we set out to dismantle this ring from top to bottom. It took about 15 months, a lot of undercover work and a lot of methods that law enforcement uses that turned out to be very successful, but we moved in, and as I said, we took out through an indictment 35 members of this crew. And as of last week, 34 of those 35 have now been convicted in this case. But more importantly, it's not about what you take out of a neighborhood, it's about what you put into it. And if you were to go back to the Milbank Frawley houses today, this weekend, and I suggest you do, you'll see in that common area between the houses, what once was a war zone and a wasteland, you'll see a common area that's now been returned to the residents, where they planted trees and a garden. And on this Saturday afternoon, I can guarantee you, the grandparents will be sitting down with the grandchildren in the courtyard, enjoying the space that was rightfully theirs, but that had been stolen from them for years. When we take a beach, as a former NYPD commander once said powerfully, you have to keep it. And so the strategy in these cases is not only to have strong enforcement, but when we go in, to work afterwards with the community to make sure that the beach is not lost, the community remains restored, and that is a successful prosecution. Our office's focus on gangs, guns, and drug violence is obviously one of my highest priorities. I know it's true for Commissioner Kelly, and I applaud him for doubling the number of detectives focusing on youth gang violence, as he said he would do. I believe we're having an impact, although sometimes I understand it's hard to see and it's hard to feel. But one unit of our office alone, just to give you a sense, which a new unit we opened up called the Violent Criminal Enterprise Unit, has removed over the last 18 months more than 450 guns off the streets of Manhattan. It's the past 18 months. and it's broken up and prosecuted more than 120 individuals associated with 6 gang operations. So that's an indication that I think these efforts are, in fact, making a difference in partnership with law enforcement and the community. But I also know that as important as it is to prosecute aggressively, the answers to reducing crime long-term aren't found in our courtrooms. That's why, just as an example, we are using funds that we have seized from drug cases to fund sports programming in Manhattan designed to provide first-rate, exceptional sports programming for boys and girls 12 to 18 years old, Friday and Saturday nights between 5 and 8 p.m., when those kids are most at risk of being victimized or getting into trouble themselves. Now, this program, here you go. And the key to this program is exceptional programming. It's not Cy Vance showing up on Friday and saying, kids, I'm going to show you how to shoot a free throw, which would be comedic. We hired Pro Hoops, which is a extraordinarily professional training group. They train the pros, and they train people who have enough resources, whose kids are in college, to hire, to train their kids to become pros or to make the varsity team. And they're now providing this programming to these kids. And Rose Gilhern was at one of our sessions earlier this year. Councilmember Jackson, I think, has stopped by as well. Good morning, council member. And we've now opened 4 sites in Manhattan: Central Harlem, Henry Street Settlement, Lower East Side, Johnson Houses, and I know we opened up a place in northern Manhattan just a couple months ago. Now we have 1,170 kids signed up for this program, okay, after a year. And I know not every kid shows up every Friday and Saturday night. So it's not like we have 100,000 kids every weekend. But the point is, it's a significant start. I believe, like I think you believe, that a crime prevented is a much better end result than a crime prosecuted. And if we can keep, as part of our reducing crime mission, as part of our crime fighting mission, if the Manhattan DA's office can help keep kids from getting into trouble or being victims of gang violence, that makes sense to me, because that makes us safer. And the effects of these new strategies and policies and legislation, they don't translate into crime reduction overnight, certainly. And I know for residents and for the public, that is frustrating, and sometimes it's scary. But we have to keep trying. That's what we have to do. You just can never let your guard down. And so, for example, today we are directing additional resources to areas like combating vehicular crime, cybercrime, identity theft, fraud against immigrants, and forensic science, where Elizabeth is working. All areas in which we see a consistent need for additional staffing, training, legislation, and public attention. In that same vein, and before we open this up with the Dean's permission for questions, I want to highlight something that is very important to our office and to me. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and there are few causes that need as much awareness brought to it as the issue of intimate partner violence. Violent crime in our city has dropped, but intimate partner violence has not. We handled roughly 5,600 cases of domestic violence in the Manhattan DA's office last year. Our office alone. And last year, there were 92 family-related homicides in 2011 in the city of New York. On any given day in New York City, there are 700 domestic-related incidents phoned in to the NYPD. 700 on a day. This past week, I was in court at the sentencing hearing of a man who had pleaded guilty to murdering his 23-year-old girlfriend. I sat at that hearing listening to the dad testify at a portion of the hearing as he recounted, obviously, the tragic pain or the tragedy and the pain that he felt at having lost his daughter. Of course, the great tragedy is that the young woman who was the victim knew that the boyfriend was unstable, but she did not know how to get out of the relationship, where she should go, and how she should get help. Those statistics about domestic violence, the 5,600 cases, the 92 family-related homicides, the 700 domestic incidents a day, leads us to ask this important question. What good is it to be living in the safest big city in America, as we do, if we aren't, in fact, safer in our homes? And we also know that domestic violence that is tolerated in the home spills out by modeling into criminal behavior into the streets. This domestic violence issue is not a criminal justice crisis, which it is in itself. It's a national health crisis. It's a public health crisis that affects not just our victims in the courthouse, but it affects them in terms of incurred medical costs, the problems of dealing with alternate housing, the problems of costs and dislocation for their children who are no longer able to live in the family home, and on and on and on. And this issue of domestic violence and the crimes related to domestic violence won't stop until we bring our full attention to it. Now, I want to give the governor great credit, and one of my legislative priorities last year as the Manhattan DA was to create legislation that would enhance punishment for repeat domestic violence offenders. And the governor has yet to sign the bill into law, but it's been passed by both houses. And now an individual who has previously committed a domestic violence offense, even if it's a misdemeanor, for example, punching your significant partner in the face, which may not be a felony, if you commit a second domestic violence offense within 5 years, that second offense can be elevated to felony status. Because the current state of the law before was that I could abuse my domestic partner physically. I could punch my domestic partner in the face time and time again, and as long as it remained a misdemeanor, the penalties the court could impose were no more serious than for evading a subway fare. And that wasn't making sense. So the legislation is going to give prosecutors new tools. I applaud the governor. I applaud the NYPD and the city for their efforts in this, and we hope, with the partnership of the city, that we're going to be able to open a family justice center in 2013 in Lower Manhattan, where victims of domestic violence are going to be able, in one building, to go and report a criminal offense, seek counseling, seek housing help, meet with prosecutors to minimize the wear and tear on the victims of domestic violence so that they have all the resources they need in order to see these difficult cases through from A to Z. And we're hopeful that that will happen. I was very honored to run for this job, and both honored and surprised to actually have prevailed in it. It's a great office. Obviously, what the hallmarks of this office are set by my predecessors. It's an office that really was founded on the principles of nonpartisanship, fairness, in our handling of all our cases. And obviously, I inherited an office where the bar was set very high when I took over. And my hope is that for however long I'm privileged to hold this office, whenever I leave it, I will have left the office with that bar raised just a little bit higher. And with the help of the New York law students in our clinic program, you're going to help me get there. Thank you very much.